Yes.
Good morning. You said in your opening ground rules that there were lots of holes, holes that Apple couldn't necessarily do themselves without this community. As a visionary, do you think you could spend a couple minutes either enumerating or talking about those holes?
Sure. Much of the great leverage of using computers these days is using them not just for computationally intensive tasks, but using them as a window into communication-intensive tasks, as you know. And never have I seen something more powerful than this computation combined with this network technology that we now have. So not only networks throughout an organization, but of course the wide area networks through the internet. And I just want to focus on something that's very close to my heart, which is living in a high-speed networked world to get your job done every day. Now, how many of you manage your own storage on your computers? How many of you back up your computers, as an example? How many of you had a crash in the last, 3 years, 4 years? Right. Okay. Let me describe the world I live in. About 8 years ago, we had high-speed networking connected to our now obsolete Next hardware running NextStep at the time. And because we were using NFS, we were able to take all of our personal data, our home directories we call them, off of our local machines and put them on a server. And the software made that completely transparent, and because the server had a lot of RAM on it, in some cases it was actually faster to get stuff from the server than it was to get stuff off your local hard disk, because in some cases it would be cached in the RAM of the server if it was in popular use. But what was really remarkable was that the organization could hire a professional person to back up that server every night, and could afford to spend a little bit more on that server, so maybe it had redundant disk drives, redundant power supplies. And in the last 7 years, you know how many times I have lost any personal data? 0. Do you know how many times I've backed up my computer? 0. I have computers at Apple, at Next, at Pixar, and at home. I walk up to any of them and log in as myself. It goes over the network, finds my home directory on the server, and it just is, I've got my stuff wherever I am. Wherever I am. And none of that is on a local hard disk. Now, what's really interesting to me is that gigabit Ethernet's coming. With gigabit Ethernet, it is faster in every case to talk to the server than it is my local hard disk. And one of the things I'm really excited about is to look at that personal computer and take out every moving part except the keyboard and the mouse. I don't need a hard disk in my computer if I can get to the server faster. See, because I look at that network connection as NFS dial tone. I get internet dial tone and NFS dial tone over that wire. And I don't care how it's done. I don't care what box is at the other end. We happen to use an Auspex at Next, right? Big one. Spent $500,000 on it. It was worth it. We did a lot of software development. Nobody ever lost anything. Nobody had to worry about that stuff. But you could have smaller ones. But managing a network like this is a pain in the butt. Setting it up, getting it all to work is really complicated. One of my hopes is that Apple can do for this new type of network, it's not so new, but for the average person it's new, with gigabit Ethernet technologies and some of the new server stuff that's coming down the pike, and some thinner hardware clients that are thinner, not necessarily software, that Apple could make that as plug and play for mere mortals as it made the user experience over a decade ago. That's one of the things where I think there's a giant hole. And I can't communicate to you how awesome this is unless you use it. And what you would decide within a day or two is that carrying around these non-connected computers or computers with tons of state in them, tons of data and state in them, is Byzantine by comparison. So there's about 3 or 4 things like that where I think there is enormous opportunity. And where I think, a lot of times, both in people and in organizations, your greatest strength can be your greatest weakness, or your greatest weakness can be your greatest strength. Apple has been highlighted as having an incredibly great weakness of being totally vertically integrated. Well, it doesn't make its own semiconductors, but it makes the hardware, it makes the software, it controls the user experience, it does the marketing and distribute, it does the marketing. And many people are constantly calling for Apple to get out of the hardware business because of that weakness that they perceive. I don't agree with that. I perceive it as a potential weakness if not managed right. I also perceive it as Apple's greatest strength if managed right. Let me give you an example. Plug and play. I mean, to get anything done in the PC industry seems to take years. Plug and play was an initiative that was launched 5 years ago. It took 2 years to get it all together between Microsoft and Compaq, and then Intel fought with them. Finally, they got Intel into the fold. And here we are 5 years later, and still it doesn't really work. Every little thing. You can imagine how long it will take them to make a thin client standard and servers that plug and play with thin clients easily. I mean, we're into the 3rd millennium. So the fact that Apple controls the product design from end to end, hardware, software, gives Apple an incredibly unique opportunity. It's the only company in the industry that does that. An incredibly unique opportunity to tackle some of these really gnarly, complex problems that could have enormous potential advantage in the market if we could solve them. And I think solve them literally a half a decade to a decade sooner than the 93-headed monster out there in the Wintel space. Now, they have their advantages too, don't get me wrong. But I think one of our great advantages is that we can really have the vision that spans all the disciplines. We control all the disciplines to actually implement a vision much faster if we can get ourselves all going in a few directions.
That really sounded great.